Imola is a great track, but unfortunately with these boats of modern Formula 1 cars, overtaking can leave a lot to be desired. But despite that, we actually had some really good battles out on track, even though, like Suzuka, it was a case of whoever made it into turn 1 first was going to win the race. And that was Max, with a brilliant swooping move around the outside into Tamburello, as Oscar seemed to be too focused on defending from George than otherwise watching Verstappen, who was going to be his main rival for the race. Max was left an opening, so Max took it as only Max Verstappen can, and from there, he never looked back. Yes, he did get a free stop under the virtual safety car, but the race was still in the bag at that point because Oscar had pitted early and then got stuck in traffic. It wasn't a great call from McLaren, but they might have felt that they had to do something to try and salvage a result. Oscar will probably learn from that start though. Learn more than Norris would, that's for sure. It was just one of those things. Too focused on George, but he had the space to get back onto the racing line and take Tamburello normally, and then let Max and George scrap instead. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20, and Oscar admitted that he did brake too early and definitely wasn't aggressive enough in his defence. Could he have done what he did at Jeddah? He might have been able to, but there's no tarmac on the outside of Tamburello. It's gravel, and the stewards might have had a dim view of it as a result. But who even knows anymore? But what I do know is that a company who is a fan of the channel has reached out to sponsor this particular video. Today's video has been done in conjunction with RECC Watches, a timepiece manufacturer that does things slightly differently. They've been making watches infused with the DNA of famous racing cars since 2014, and their special edition watches have been made from parts of Steve McQueen's TR6, Carroll Shelby's prototype Mustang, and parts of John DeLorean's personal DMC-12. The latest project for this Danish company is something incredibly special, a timepiece that features parts of Ayrton Senna's Lotus 98T chassis number 4 from 1986, and REC has worked closely with classic Team Lotus over the last 2 years to design and build this watch, and now it's on pre-sale with 15% off for any pre-orders. The watch uses parts fabricated from the original parts of the original car, such as the aluminium plenum tubes to create the outer chapter rings and the tachometer scales. As such, the 98 T4 timepiece is limited to just 989 examples, each one containing many callbacks to the original car that is still raced to this day. Things such as the black and gold colour tones that take inspiration from its iconic livery, the large 12 that's skeletonized onto the rotor, and the backplate decoration is designed to look like the Renault Turbo V6 that powered Senna in chassis number 4 for the second half of the 1986 season. To learn more about REC Watches and to see their history and learn more about their motorsport passion, you can check them out via the link in the description. But much like Suzuka, clean air was king. Once Max was in it, he could drive a bit easier knowing that he was in the lead and didn't need to push his car as hard as he might otherwise have done to keep up with the McLarens if they were leading. Now Red Bull did bring some upgrades for this weekend, such as a new side pod assembly that did some, well, stuff, and they also tried their own versions of a couple of McLaren bits to try and open the setup window a bit, which, actually, it looked like those parts did work a bit. It did seem like the balance of the Red Bull was a bit better this weekend in Verstappen's hands. Not great, but certainly better. And it looked like that Verstappen was having to work less to keep the car on the knife edge that Red Bull needs to be on. Now, as mentioned in several of these opinion pieces, the Red Bull isn't a terrible car, as much as the most passionate of Max Verstappen fanboys will want you to believe otherwise because, well, an underdog story is much more fun, isn't it? That Red Bull is not a Haas, it's just a diva. When it's in the right setup window, it's pretty quick. When it's not, it's a handful. It's just that Max can hold it on that so-called knife edge much better than Perez, Tsunoda and Lawson can or could. So calling it a tractor probably isn't the operative word to describe it, because a tractor implies that it's slow. Handful is probably way more apt. Now Max does make the difference, I am not disputing that at all, but it's more that he can hold it in that very fine window of where the car works, rather than the car is slow and he's extracting performance from it. If Red Bull can get that window of operation even wider, Tsunoda will start finishing higher up. Guaranteed.
Not a guarantee.
But despite the troubles with overtaking, given how old school this track is, drivers were still having a red hot go of it. Russell and Norris, for instance, around laps 8, 9 and 10, with Norris taking to the grass to try and get through at the Villeneuve chicane on lap 10. And this battling was bringing Alonso into things, with the Astons probably getting nosebleeds with how high up the grid they were both running. with both of them making the top 10 shootout at the expense of the two Ferraris, who must have been royally embarrassed in front of the Tifosi. And Alonso and Stroll had got their cars into the top 10 shootout using harder compound tyres than the Ferraris were using. On lap 11, Norris managed to swoop around the outside of Russell into the Villeneuve chicane, going around the outside of the left-hander, which is the first part of the Villeneuve chicane. That is the sort of racing that Norris needs to do more often. He can do it, he just needs to do it way more often and stop chickening out of some of these moves. But McLaren then decided to pit Piastri on lap 14. Like mentioned, maybe they thought a two-stopper would work, but we'll get into all of that a bit later on. Leclerc, Russell and others had already been in trying something similar, while others were clearly one-stopping. But with the traffic, Oscar wasn't going to make any undercut work, which didn't help McLaren at all. And losing time with the slow stop as well? Not good. It was such a not good call that even Ferrari went, "Nah mate," but obviously in Italian. They did pit Leclerc early doors, but then they found out that the medium tyres had this second wind to them that allowed them to go a lot further than they otherwise anticipated. Hamilton, meanwhile, was on the harder tyre, but they were still going, yeah, it's still not worth it to try and undercut some of these cars. Maybe Ferrari's learning. On lap 29, the virtual safety car was called, allowing Max a free pit stop. Now, to show you how insane this all was, this was on lap 29. Oscar had been on his hard tyres for 15 laps at this point, and Williams and Ferrari had realised that this could be a one-stopper with everything that was going on, and in race trim, Max and his Red Bull were faster in the race pace anyway. Why? Because of the nature of the track, more than anything. The corners at Imola, which, with the exceptions of maybe the exit of Acqua Minerale and also the Variante Alta, lend themselves more to the Red Bull than the McLaren. If they were to race in Miami again, the McLarens would have likely dominated the race like they'd done, well, in the race at Miami. The McLaren has a bit of a deficit in the higher speed corners, and even with the Tamburello and Villeneuve chicanes, the corners at Imola are more Red Bull friendly. Andrea Stella told the media, "If you look at the aero maps of Miami and here, they are in a completely different place. We're good at Bahrain, China, Miami, but in the high speed part of the aero map we have no particular advantage over them," that being Red Bull. Further, the Red Bull looks like they've improved their car. And there is data to correlate with this, because at Hungary last year when Max had a, less than stellar race, it has to be said, as frustrations with that car set in and then he collided with Hamilton, the Red Bull had the McLaren's number over the back end of the circuit between the exit of the chicane and the start of the twisty final sector. Everywhere else, the McLarens had the edge. The tyres that were brought to Imola also played to the Red Bull's strengths, which it does actually have. Red Bull's high-speed downforce was better in the long run compared to qualifying. Because of the better high-speed performance, the Red Bull was being better on its tyres, because it's not sliding around like it was doing at other circuits they've been to this year. So the grip was more consistent, and the car wasn't in that cycle of sliding a bit, ruining the rubber, sliding a bit more, ruining the rubber more, and then it just snowballing from that point onwards. They had that very tight margin in qualifying, although I don't know how much Piastri was hampered on his pole lap by traffic, but Red Bull managed to make it work longer in the race. 29 laps on mediums is the result. Piastri destroyed his tyres keeping up with Max, but Lando seemed to have his work a tiny bit better, even with battling with George for a bit. But the virtual safety car did mess a few people around because they were at the wrong point of their stints to be able to do anything in that period. Max and a couple of others took their stops to take advantage of the virtual safety car. Lando took his stop too early to benefit from the virtual safety car, but the likes of Piastri, Leclerc and so on were stuck on their two-stop strategies. Piastri would pit again on lap 30 during that virtual safety car, but everything was now so messed up, he dropped down, and he had to catch and overtake Albon and was then 14 seconds behind Lando once he got past the Williams. Meanwhile, at the front, Verstappen in clean air was enjoying a 4/10 per lap advantage. Although Red Bull have been quite cautious with all of this, they're saying that the car hasn't necessarily been made faster, just more manageable. The one person who did benefit from all this virtual safety car stuff was Hamilton in the Ferrari, which even now still seems weird to say. He pitted on lap 30 with the likes of Antonelli, Hadjar and so on, and took on a set of medium tyres. But in doing so, he managed to use some pace that had been unlocked from the car to then overtake Antonelli and Hadjar on track with the tyre advantage because he was on softer rubber, and then got himself up to 5th, and the Tifosi went wild. But then we got a full safety car when Antonelli stopped in exactly the same place that Ocon had done when his house broke down. So why was it a virtual safety car for one and then a full safety car for another, even though they broke down in, nearest makes no difference, the same spot? Was it because Antonelli was closer to the track than Ocon was? I don't know, but answers on a postcard, I guess. But either way, it was a free pit stop for Max again, even if he didn't exactly need it. Piastri was stuck where he was as he had 19 lap old tyres by this point, and Norris had tyres that were 1 lap older than Max's. McLaren probably should have just had the two cars swap and see what Lando could do, but he had to earn the second place instead of being gifting it, and he took 4 laps or so to get past. But once again, with clear air, Max just had to manage, and he took the win by 5 seconds. But further back, Albon was having an absolute blinder of a race, running as high as 3rd, and with his much fresher tyres there might have been a chance of chasing down Piastri and snatching down that final podium place. But on the final lap, Leclerc tried to throw it up the inside of Tamburello and Albon was sent across the gravel, with Hamilton picking up a free spot and Leclerc then having to hand the place back. As it was, Hamilton had gone from 6th up to 4th and ended up just 1.5 seconds from the podium himself. Ferrari had done a good job to recover from their utterly terrible qualifying, and like Red Bull, the Ferraris had brought a slight upgrade. Sam Collins on F1 TV showed that Ferrari had brought a revision to the rear brake cooling ducts. Both drivers had been complaining about the brakes in practice, and their problems looked to continue into qualifying. But as the race went on, the cars seemed to be getting a bit better to drive. We've seen in the sprints that Hamilton has done quite well, winning the first sprint of the season in China, but they've otherwise struggled. But they are expected to bring another massive upgrade to the rear end of the car for around the Spanish Grand Prix, which is also when the flexi wing ban kicks in. But the changes to the car will be expensive and will eat into their budget for this season, which is obviously now limited. Apparently, it's something to do with the gearbox casing and the suspension, but we won't know anything until we see it. And it's also a risk, because the development time they've spent trying to fix this year's car could have been spent working on next year's car, and next year's car will be made to a brand new rule set. So if Ferrari spends too much time on this year's car, how will next year's car suffer? Again, we're not going to know until we see testing in the first few races of next season. But speaking of brakes, McLaren have been at the forefront of something that has sparked a bit of debate, with accusations from Red Bull that they might have been trying to mix water with the air in the tyres, and that will help cool the tyres down, and, make them last longer as a result. I'm no engineer, but that doesn't sound like it would work, because if the water is getting hot inside the tyre, the water vapour would surely increase the tyre pressures, and then, like I say, I'm not an engineer. And if they were putting a decent amount of water actually inside the tyres, as some people on social media have been claiming, surely as the tyre is spinning round, the inertia of that water sloshing around is going to make the car an absolute pig to drive. It's just highly likely that McLaren have come up with some method of routing the air through everything, and that's resulting in more efficient cooling than some of the other teams have been able to come up with. Some of the theories I've seen online have been speculation at best, and clickbait at worst. The McLaren ducts help them to keep the core temperature of the tyres down, but at tracks like Imola, where it's about keeping the surface temperature down, they've struggled a bit. So that's all that then, so what else happened over the weekend? There was debut 2 Electric Boogaloo of Franco Colapinto, who was driving the Alpine this weekend in place of Jack Doohan. And to Franco's credit, he was through to the second part of qualifying, but he trashed his car on the exit of Tamburello, after overcooking the right-hand part of Tamburello and smashed into the wall on the exit of Tamburello towards the end of the first session. Not the start he would have wanted, and I'm sure there might have been a few Australians watching this and wondering if Briatore had made the right decision, but his smash was enough to bring out the red flags. But there was some confusion, because Behrman had crossed the line to set a time good enough for the second session, but then had it deleted because of the red flags. But Behrman had crossed the line before the red flags came out. Imola's timing line is further back on the start-finish straight, and the red lights were on above the track, the starting lights that is, but that was to inform drivers that the session was over. It wasn't until after Behrman crossed the line that you see the red flags flashing at the side of the track. Now, Bortoletto did go out and sit at the end of the pit lane while the debate over whether Behrman was through or not was going on, so maybe that had something to do with it, forcing the FIA's hand or something. Either way, answers on a postcard. There was also Tsunoda's shunt in the opening portion of the first qualifying session. It was a big shunt, it was a slightly scary shunt, and it was caused by him just taking a bit too much curb and pushing a bit too hard in a car that didn't necessarily want to play ball with him in that particular moment. But that said, Tsunoda started from the pit lane and recovered to 10th. Okay, he was helped by the 2 retirements, but still, he scored a point. A point. But with Red Bull bringing more upgrades over the course of the season, hopefully that setup window gets even wider and Tsunoda can start to get higher up on the grid in qualifying and finish higher up in the top 10. And speaking of upgrades, Aston's updates seem to be working pretty well, bringing a big old dump of bodywork updates that may or may not have had some newies sprinkled on them. Either way, they seem to be working, with the 2 Astons through into the 3rd qualifying session at the expense of Ferrari, and managing to do so on harder compound tyres than the Ferraris were running. Aston brought a new floor, a new beam wing, and some modifications around the cockpit that, like mentioned, seem to have done them all right. They were running quite well, with both cars in the top 10 and Alonso running as high as 5th, but they ultimately got shuffled around by the safety car calls, the virtual and physical safety car, and they were on the wrong end of both of them. Alonso finished just outside of the top 10, with Stroll down in 15th. Hot take, if Alonso doesn't get his first points of the season at Monaco, he'll likely get them at Barcelona, but we'll have to see what happens. So McLaren will be left scratching their heads as to what went wrong for race pace, while Red Bull will be happy that their car has made a bit of progress. Not necessarily on the pace front, but definitely in the whole being able to drive it front. Now next up is Monaco, with that being a race where it really is a case of whoever makes it into turn 1 first will win the race. But the question is, who will be the person who makes it there first? Do we get a McLaren lockout? The Ferrari somehow able to get into the mix like they did last time at Monaco? A surprise pole for Antonelli or Russell? Or will something incredible happen like the Astons getting up there? It's something to think about because at Monaco anything can happen. And then will begin the endless speculation about what the flexi wing ban will do. But at the same time, Williams will be left thinking about what could have been after this race. While Albon came home in 5th despite being sent across the gravel by Leclerc, there's the thinking that Williams might actually be underachieving. A strategy call given to Sainz made him think about disobeying the order, with a second wind of the medium tyres coming back to bite them later on, with how Verstappen had managed to keep going on those mediums, and would have done a one stop without the safety car. It left Sainz finishing down in 8th when it could have been higher. But that's F1 really, isn't it? But even though the race was won at the first corner, there was still plenty going on. And with Imola disappearing for at least the immediate future, it will suck to lose such a historic track that's an absolute joy to drive. At least, on the sims and the racing games it is. The tyres that Pirelli brought to this race left the teams guessing, with some fearing it might be so difficult to overtake an undercut was the way forward, or a two-stopper. But it is what it is, really. But they're up and off to Monaco this weekend for the annual parade around the Principality. Meanwhile, it's Mrs. Millward's birthday on that particular day, so I will be watching the Indy 500 instead. Don't worry, she already knows that that's going to happen. I said it's work and she's just gone, yeah, okay. You know, I'm technically correct, the best kind of correct. This is technically work. But if you do have any other opinions on this race and what's to come, do leave them down in the designated comment submission zone underneath this video. So then, a look at the Emilia Romagna San Marino Grand Prix that happened yesterday, and some opinions and analysis on said Grand Prix. If this thing has made you think things about the thing, then do like this thing so I know a good job was done on the thing. And for more things from the channel, click the subscribe button thing and ring the bell thing so you never miss out on anything that I do around here. Massive thanks to RECC Watches and also the mad lads who support me via Patreon. The link to Patreon is down in the description, as well as links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Well, the super thanks if you just want to do a one and done donation, and membership so you can do Patreon but without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.